Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Devoted to the business of purveying food and decanting wines, Food and Wine Radio is a unique program highlighting not food recipes or wine vintages, but how to make a profit while satisfying America's palates. Your Food and Wine Radio host, Ann Daw, former president of the Specialty Food Association and a longtime food executive who has held senior positions both here and abroad with Kraft Foods and Philip Morris. On each show, leaders of the world's culinary and wine industries share the secrets of their success. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
And our guest is Tim Young of Food and Thought. I love the title of that company. I love learning the titles of various companies. And he was recommended to us by another guest, Timothy Carney of Naturally Nutty Foods. And with that introduction, we welcome Tim Young to the program, and I turn it over to you, Ann.
Thanks, Don. Well, Timothy Fitzgerald Young is founder, president, and chef of Food for Thought. It's a mission-based food company creating delicious, clean label, low sugar, organic, and truly natural food products with a priority on locally sourced ingredients. Welcome to Food and Wine Insider, Tim.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Tim, I'm fascinated by your background. Please tell our listeners about you before you created Food for Thought over 20 years ago and how it influenced the products and the mission of your company.
Oh, wow, that's a big one, but I'm happy to answer that. I'm a political scientist by training, and I spent, the earliest years of my life in human relief work, and that could have been, building schools in Nicaragua or Africa or someplace, and I was active in that industry mostly as a volunteer, but it was truly, kind of where my heart was. And in those experiences, I learned a lot about how food was grown and traded globally, and I'd always kind of been a food hobbyist, so that experience kind of inspired me to try to make food a different way, in a way that might have a little bit more conscious effort to take care of all the people in the chain from seed to table, so to speak. And at that time, fair trade didn't exist, and, globalization was just kind of getting a start. And so I basically started a small little organic farm in northern Michigan and tried to stay local, sustainable, and then when we do import ingredients from overseas, we focus on trying to find fair trade, such as our sugar, for example, and our preserves is all fair trade certified organic sugar. And organic's been a big piece of what we've done, though not exclusively. So that's kind of the background. So I'm a political scientist we spent a lot of time studying in foreign countries, and I can tell you all about Cuba, where I did a lot of graduate research, but I make jam for a living to this day. So.
Tim, you mentioned that you started on your own organic farm. Was the land already organic, or did you have to convert it to organic? Because as I understand it, that can take some time.
Well, it was not organic at the time, and I actually certified it organic about 4 years before I even started farming. And I did that partially because I felt like, I have a certified organic facility, a kitchen basically, where I'm making jam, but you take one step outside the door and I could put anything on the grounds I wanted, and that kind of didn't make sense. So for me, it was more a matter of spreading my organic footprint, and then obviously we started planting herbs and other things that to this day we grow and utilize in a lot of our products. The conversion to organic was fairly simple. That really depends a lot on the history of the land. You can buy feral land, and if the previous owner can document that they've done nothing or applied nothing to it for 3 years, you can generally get organic certification in the first year. Product land that's existing and being utilized conventionally with sprayed, non-organic pesticides or herbicides or fertilizers and what have you, that's a little more tricky because then you do have to wait 3 years of growing that soil organically before you can get certification. So it's usually easier to find land that just hasn't been used.
Yeah, that's helpful because I think people don't understand that you just can't start organic unless the land itself hasn't had pesticide use and that kind of thing. It's also clear from what I hear in your voice that you're very passionate about fair trade. Please tell our listeners what fair trade is all about and why it's important.
Well, for me, because I've had this experience of traveling around the world, and I still do to this day, I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit that does development work in fair trade communities around the world. And for me, it's not very many people can do that, right? We're all busy people. We have professions. I'm very privileged to be able to volunteer and do that, but I know we can't all get to know our farmer, right, who grows our coffee beans or where our olive oil comes from or what have you. And so for me, the simplest way to describe fair trade is it puts a face on your food. And it does that by creating linkages. So, for example, I'm a group of small holding coffee farmers, for example, in Chiapas, Mexico. The vast majority of coffee in this world is grown on farms of less than 5 acres, not plantations like you think of or some of us imagine. But those small farmers together have very little market power or control. They're subject to whatever the international commodity trading rates are. And some years they, sell their coffee for less than what it costs them to grow it. And it's a very precarious and, industry to be in. And so fair trade helps people, these small growers, coordinate their own cooperatives where they can join forces, and maybe a few hundred to a few thousand coffee farmers will pool their sources, create a warehouse, and create really a much more sophisticated business. And then instead of trading to distributors and traders or selling, their coffee beans, in the international commodity markets where other people in Paris and New York, determine the price of coffee, they sell directly to a buyer's cooperative in a developed country. So, for example, a lot of the small independent fair trade coffee shops you see around this country, they're springing up everywhere, they are also, most of them, members of a small buyer's cooperative. So they collectively, small coffee owners, pool their resources so they can go to those small, coffee bean growers in Mexico, for example, and buy directly from them an entire container of coffee beans. There's no middlemen in there to mark it up. So a larger portion of that cost of that coffee bean goes to that small farmer. They get sometimes 1.5 to 3, 4 times the rate of the international commodity exchanges. You pay maybe 10, 15 cents more for your cup of coffee, on our end. That's something most of us can chin on a daily basis and don't even notice, but it makes a fairly big impact on the life and the quality of life and the community development opportunities for that farm and that community where the coffee comes from. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, that was perfect, actually. And I think people don't really understand. They hear fair trade, but I don't think they really understand how it works. And that was a great description. You have quite an extensive line of jams, preserves, salsas, sauces. I could kind of go on. Please talk about how you produce your products and a little bit about how you converted an abandoned elementary school.
So I'm kind of a soft path advocate and a self-sufficiency guy. So literally when I graduated from college, I built a very small house in the woods in northern Michigan from entirely recycled materials. It's kind of quaint. I gutted some old houses and, got old leaded glass windows and made from old barn siding. And it's kind of a cool little house I live in to this day and raised my children here. And I built the Food for Thought facility, our original one, right next door. Same kind of thing. I built it from all local native wood and recycled materials. And that was our home for the first 23 years we were in business, and our farm as well. But as time went on, we had outgrown it a long time, and we were really kind of running not very efficiently because we had a place where we stored our product a few miles away, and we didn't have much space for storage on site, so we did mail order from another building. And so we wanted to get everything under one roof, and hence our local school in a town 20 miles from here, school district had an elementary school they'd abandoned for 4 or 5 years. And we were able to pick that up at a reasonable price and refurbish it, and we moved everything there. So now all of our warehousing and our production and everything is all under one roof now. And we actually turned it into a micro food manufacturing hub because it's larger than what we need. So we utilize the spaces we needed, and then we're leasing out the other spaces to other small food artisans. It could be anything from cheesemakers to chocolatiers to a startup brewery or what have you. So we just moved in there in May. And we kind of, followed our, company DNA there too. Our original building was built from recycled and native materials, and we refurbished that facility that was going to get demolished. We saved it and then refurbished it on some pretty high state-of-the-art green energy standards. And it was all a very, very fun project for us, and it's kind of exciting to be in a new spot.
Well, again, we're talking with Timothy Young. He's founder, president, and chef of Food for Thought, a mission-based food company. Tim, so talk a little bit about your products. You have a particular way of making these products and the characteristics of your products, and I want people to know about that.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. We're still to this day a very small artisanal company, right? And while we have grown, we've kind of stuck to the same kind of value system. We still have a lot of direct connections with our farmers. I'm still working with the same, blueberry farmer, for example, that I bought my first batch of organic blueberries from 20 years ago. I think I'm getting old enough now that the problem I'm running into is my farmer partners that I've been with forever retiring. My strawberry farmer retired last year. My pear and apple farmers retiring next year, and a lot of them are not passing their farms on to family, or they're changing and just slowing down and cutting back. And but we're committed to that. That's kind of been our core for a long time and continues to be. We're still a very small batch. A batch of, jam or salsa or pasta sauce for us is 150 pounds, where, most commercial producers of these kinds of products are making 1,000-pound batches. And so just kind of a different feel. Nobody really sees the product. We're actually still making jam like you do at home, in an open top kettle with open flame burners. And, we do certainly have some automated machinery and for food safety and consistency and for other reasons, but it's definitely something that is still handmade on a daily basis.
And how many products are you producing today?
I'm never prepared to answer that question. I don't really have that number in my head, but I'll probably throw out something like, there's probably about 40 different types of products across that whole category of mustards and sauces and jams and dressings and so forth. And we're constantly in, sort of product development mode too. I'd say at any one time there's 4 or 5 products that are in development that can take anywhere from months to years to kind of perfect before we put them into the market.
I read somewhere, and I thought this was a very interesting juxtaposition, but you grew up in Flint, Michigan, an organic farm, and live in a green building you built. The juxtaposition of these locations, I found fascinating, as everyone knows, in Flint, Michigan was where there was a water crisis that occurred that sickened and actually killed some people a few years ago. Talk a little bit about how these environmental issues continue to fuel your passion.
Well, you're right. As a kid growing up in Flint, and I grew up there in the 70s, and so that was a time of great exodus. I think people were leaving Flint close to tens of thousands a day for years. I mean, the city was really abandoned then, and there wasn't a lot of, anything to inspire someone to stay. But in reality, where I live now, we used to call up north, and if you were lucky enough, your parents would vacation up here, which mine did on occasion. And so this was paradise. We'd come up here to go fishing or camping or skiing or something on occasion. And there's such a difference between the industrial south of Michigan, and a lot of people who've never been here don't realize you get halfway up the mitten and it just becomes a wilderness paradise of lakes and rivers and streams, and where people from Chicago and all over Indiana, Illinois, and further south come to vacation. And so it was a real easy move for me. I actually kind of broke my father's heart. I was accepted into the University of Detroit School of Architecture, and I changed my mind like a month before I left, and I moved up to Traverse City up here in northern Michigan and went to a community college because I wanted to be up here. I wanted to fish and ski and just enjoy this wilderness, and it was a decision I'd never regret. I went on to other places after that, but this became home base, and I always came back here in between travels and college, changes. And so I feel so fortunate that I live in what we used to call up north. And of course, with that comes this huge responsibility. We're surrounded by the Great Lakes. I live next to a 70,000 acre national park called the Sleeping Bear Dunes. And, we derive our living from this nature because tourists come here and visit our land and buy our products. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being a caretaker of this land.
Well, that's terrific. I'm sure our listeners would like to hear about how you funded the business.
Yes. So, there's no one way to do that, and there's probably as many ways to fund a business as there are people to start one, right? So, my story would be maybe not untypical in that it was cash flowed in the early stages. I was kind of still involved a little bit in the building trades, which is how I kind of funded college and my early life. And that was advantageous because I tell people often that the first 6 months I was in business, I wore a tool belt as often as I wore an apron, right? Because I'd build a building and then I'd add on and then I'd add on and then, and I also, refurbished a lot of old, production equipment from, used, auctions and so forth. And so I had kind of some sweat equity skills I was able to put in. At some point I did, because I built my own home, it was fairly low in debt. I did end up second mortgaging my home at another stage to fund the further growth of my business. And then there were some more traditional bank loans along the way as well, if a large piece of equipment was needed or something else. And so it was really a combination of just about everything I could think of when money was needed. And then I think the biggest step and the most significant for me was the most recent one, and that is bringing on partners. I'd never sold any equity. My wife and I owned the company outright, and about 5 years ago, I brought on a couple of partners. And then a few years later, they came in a little more deeply. So it's been a way to fund this new school move and facility there, and given us some growth capital. And so we are actually feeling a little bit of growth, where probably 4 or 5 years prior to that, we were pretty flat. We weren't growing much. We were just kind of surviving. So this has given us an opportunity to offer some of our staff more full-time year-round work, a little bit better benefits. So we're kind of moving into a little bit more comfortable space, a little bit less seasonal fluctuation. And so I've done a little bit of everything from, investment capital to banks to sweat equity to second mortgaging my home. I've done it all.
I think that's very helpful for people to hear about, because at some point you need significant capital, especially as you scale up. And you've done it in a way that has almost been, and sorry, no pun intended, almost organically. Again, we're talking with Timothy Young. He's the founder, president, and chef of Food for Thought, a mission-based food company. You mentioned earlier that your facility was large enough not only for your products, but also to be able to lease out to other businesses to co-pack. How much of your revenue comes from your own products versus co-packing for other people?
So right now the ratio is about, I think, 70-30, to give it a rough guess. It's varied over the years from 50-50 to, maybe even in the other direction, where there might have been times when co-packing was even more than our own production. But at this point, it's about 70% all Food for Thought products and about 30% other companies. And most of those are similar, small, artisanal brands, not unlike ours, that are local or regional in nature. I've got one customer that's kind of a, sort of a more global company, which is Eden Foods, which is an organic company that's based here in Michigan, but they're a very large global distributed company. So we have little projects, little projects with big companies and big projects with little companies and everything in between, really.
Well, I think that's also helpful, because it's giving you a way to also raise capital to help continue to support your business. Let's talk a little bit about where you sell your products. Is it specialty? Is it grocery? How geographically dispersed are you? Talk a little bit about where someone can find your product.
So, yes, you're going to find us in probably natural food stores. So, something like a Whole Foods and a Mariano's and, things in those natures are going to be where you'll probably find us. Natural food co-ops are often a common customer. We're going to be a premium top shelf item, being, low sugar and grade A fruits and certified organic, and many are certified GMO free and kosher and gluten free, and others as well. So all those certifications come with a little bit of a premium. So will be a top shelf item in higher end delis and cheese shops as well. Like, for example, in some Whole Food stores throughout the Midwest, you won't find us, cut in necessarily in the jam aisle. You'll find us over, stacked in the cheese department, right? In wherever the cold cheese cooler, because most Whole Foods have a big almost cheese department now. And because, we do a lot of wine and herb-infused preserves, for example, like blueberry lavender and strawberry basil and apricot chardonnay are some of our best-selling preserves. Those all make excellent and were developed for cheese pairings. So you'll often find us in a cheese department anywhere in the Midwest, even out to New York, New Jersey, and some out that as far that way. Not very much west of the Mississippi at this point, or in the South. We're definitely Midwest and Northeast.
So it's clear that you're a premium produced product, and therefore it should command a premium pricing. But how much more than your typical, let's say, in the preserve category? Because you're so unique, it's hard to really compare. But just to give people an idea, what level of premium?
So most of our jams are going to retail in the $7 to $9 range, and I'd say a mustard's going to be like $5 to $6, and a salsa probably $6 to $7, something like that. So, there'll be a few folks higher than us, and a good chunk of them less than us. So, depending on the store we're in, there are some stores where we're pretty average. So.
And do you have sales also online? And could you talk a little bit about the proportion of online sales versus in store?
Oh, good question. So we do have an online presence, and it's relatively new, or new, or more accurately renewed. Yes, we had an online presence fairly heavily when we were early on in the business, and then I scaled that back after a while, mostly just because it was too much, right? Trying to do all the other things we were doing and all the other channels, that was an easy one to dial back. And then we've kind of started to put a little more resource into that in the last couple of years, so our online presence is more visible now. It's still, I would say, a fairly small percentage of our overall distribution channel, but it's growing. It's our fastest growing channel probably right now.
And as you have been scaling, are you using distributors or brokers?
We are. So we work mostly with distributors, and hence why you will probably only find us in kind of the north, Midwest and northeast at this time, because that's really where our distribution is focused. We have a little bit down in Texas, which was just kind of an outlier that, they came to us and said, we want your product kind of thing. But actually in the evolution of my company, now that we moved into the new facility, one of the goals was to get me out of day-to-day operations and get me out into the field, exploring some new territories. And so I'm kind of stepping into that role now, which is kind of fun and new for me. So hopefully we'll be in some other areas in the country in the coming months.
And in terms of sales, are you handling that in-house yourself, or do you use a broker network?
We really, when we say we do our in-house sales, that's mostly to distributors. So while I may approach a chain, and try to sell them our product, if they say, yes, we're interested, the very next conversation we have with them is, okay, who's going to be the distributor, right? So usually you're either finding a distributor who will get you into their already established network of stores, or you find a chain that wants you, and then you go to a distributor and say, such and such, store wants me, and will you distribute it? And they'll usually say yes if you're bringing them business. So it's we're usually working one of those two options.
That is rather typical. A retailer doesn't want everything coming in their back door. They would sometimes, as they are bigger, they want you to use a distributor. But a broker is a different thing. A broker is an individual that almost acts as your salesperson, makes the calls, goes to retailers, presents your products. Yep. Do you use brokers, or do you find that you really handle that yourself?
We really do handle that ourselves, and we've tried brokers, and there's so many different ways to build this model. And in a small scale artisanal company like ours, we're already up there at the higher end of the price premium, and there's not a lot of margin to play with. And so we have found that us selling direct to distributors, any chance we get, is is more successful for us than having a broker out there who is, representing 50 other products and just kind of out there making sales calls on our behalf, as well as, however many other, companies they have in their portfolio. I think some of them do good work and probably work well in a lot of industries. It's just we haven't had a lot of success for us.
Okay, that's great. Again, we're talking with Timothy Young. He's the founder, president, and chef of Food for Thought, a mission-based food company. I'm curious to know, how many people are involved in the business, and how about your family? Are they involved in this business? Have you thought about succession yourself?
I've thought about succession, and I have intentionally not wanted my children to follow into this business. They grew up in it. Literally, for the first 20-some years, my commute to work was a 100-foot walk through the woods to the facility I built, right? And so my kids have been steeped in it, and they've, even as little kids, they'd go over there in an afternoon and help, label jars or pack boxes, or it's kind of been something they've always known. And I didn't want to make it too easy for them, when they would say to me as they were little that, I want to work for Food for Thought when I, get older. And I'd use that as a lesson to say, well, great, what job do you want? And then they'd tell me, I want to do this. And I was like, well, you're going to have to go to college because you can't just walk into that job, or you have to start in the warehouse and you have to drive the fork truck. You have to, it was always a great lesson on, well, you don't just get handed that, right? You've got to earn it. And I think in time they just, that vision got old, and now they have their own dreams. My daughter's off to her first year of college, and my son's in 8th grade, and he'd rather work a harder job, at my friend's chocolate shop or something than work in our facility because he's had enough by now. So, no succession there, I guess.
Sure. Is your wife or other family members involved in the business?
No, my wife on and off over the years, but she made a really smart decision, I think, early on when I first started the company, and the discussion came up of, do you want in, or, it wasn't her dream. It wasn't her love, and she just said, nope. She said, I will work for the company if I'm needed or fill in here and there, but I don't want to be your partner. And I want to pursue other things. So that was really great. She did end up working for the company most of the first 20 years, at least part-time, but she always wanted to have that ability to punch out at 5 o'clock or whatever and not, be an owner, so to speak. And so I'm the guy that lost sleep, and worked the weekends or whatever. I took on that overworked, entrepreneurial role. So she was smart. And I think that was really great for our marriage too. There were no arguments over, financials on weekends or, discussions about, major directional changes or anything. She was very happy to not be involved.
And you talked earlier about having some temporary employees, and that's kind of more smoothed out. So how many folks work for the company today?
There's about 20 of us now, and and that's been an ongoing challenge. There is a natural fluctuation of food demand through the country anyway, but then you add to that we're in a tourist area, so a lot of our sales have been tied to the tourist industry, and because we're also a premium product, we end up being in a lot of gift channels too, which can be very seasonal. So at least on that production side, it's been difficult to keep all of our staff employed full-time year-round. Some will go to part-time in the winter, some will be off for a month or two in the winter. And so by changing our model a little bit and going more into regional distribution and getting more into grocery distribution, we've been able to flatten that line out a little bit more.
I have so many more questions for you, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to ask one last question, though I did want to ask about the retail shop, but we won't get into that. What advice would you give to someone who may be thinking about farming or producing organic products? What's your best piece of advice?
I think it's easier to start organic from the beginning than it is to try to convert later, because it's less of a burden to start it from the beginning. I know a lot of people that say, well, I just don't have the wherewithal to to organic right now. We're going to maybe convert later. And by then you have already developed systems of agriculture, systems of processing, standardize all your procedures, and then you got to come back and rewrite and redo everything differently. And they're not all that different anyway if you start them from the beginning. So if you are inclined towards organic, just don't put it off. That'd be my advice.
Timothy Young, you're one of the most interesting guests we've had in a long time. I know I learned a lot, and especially that apricot champagne apricot. When you mention it, my mouth positively watered.
All right. Well, I'm happy to do that for you. So.
But anyway, your website again for our listeners and how they can reach you?
Yeah, our website is foodforthought.net, and that's N-E-T. If you do .com, you'll get something else. So, yeah, foodforthought.net.
Okay. A link to that website will be on Food and Wine Insider tonight, where you can hear this and every other past and future Food and Wine Insider program. And you can, by the way, tell us if there's a guest you want to hear. But in the meantime, Timothy Young, thank you so much for being with us. It was a real pleasure.
You're very welcome.
To be successful, most restaurant owners require extra capital from time to time. When you need funding to renovate, buy equipment, or manage cash flow, you don't have time to track down financial statements or wait weeks for a decision. That's where Cabbage can help. Cabbage gives small businesses access to a line of credit of up to $200,000. Apply online and you'll get a decision right away. Since Cabbage is a line of credit, you can take the exact amount you need. You never have to reapply to take additional loans, and you'll only pay for the funds you use. Cabbage has helped more than 230,000 businesses from every industry, and with $4 billion in funding, Cabbage is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau and was named the Forbes Top 100 Companies twice in a row. Check out Cabbage at cabbagewithak.com/foodandwine, and you'll get a $50 gift card when you qualify. That's KABBAGE.com/foodandwine.
Line of credit is subject to credit approval. See terms and conditions. All Cabbage business loans are issued by Celtic Bank, a Utah chartered industrial bank, member FDIC.
And our next guest is Nancy Wexelbaum. She's the owner, leader, chief chef, which she often disclaims, of Gracious Gourmet. Her company offers an awfully eclectic group of products, and she's here to talk about it with you. Ann and Nancy, take it away.
We are here today with Nancy Wexelbaum. She's the owner of Gracious Gourmet. It's a line of chutneys and spreads and tapenades, pestos, and so much more. Nancy, welcome to Food and Wine Insider. And I wanted to ask you, what was the inspiration for the Gracious Gourmet?
Well, I love to cook. I love to eat. And I was in Connecticut at our house up there during a power outage making chutneys just for friends. And a 98-year-old lady came over during a power outage, and I was serving her a steak with some chutney, and she said to me, "This is so delicious, you should start a business." And I thought, I love to cook. I love business. I was in business with my husband in Manhattan for many years and in retailing, and I decided I wanted to take a detour. And I thought, what a great idea for a new business. So the next day I came up with 6 different ideas for products. I had no idea about how you make products in the industrial market. And I knew nothing about co-packers, nothing about wholesaling. It wasn't my area of expertise or experience. But sometimes ignorance is, and I decided I love to cook, and I said, okay, here's 6 products. I came up with a name. That was in late February of 2006, And in November of 2006, I launched the business. I had 6 products to sell, and the co-packer said, you have to make 50 cases of each of these. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this stuff around for the rest of my life. And I got so nervous about it that I made up samples the month before, and I went to every market in Fairfield County, Litchfield County, and many that I knew in Manhattan, and I pre-sold half the production, and that's how I got started.
Well, that is particularly brilliant to have done that. Nancy, you have an economics and a finance background, which is very helpful. Most entrepreneurs don't. How have these competencies really helped you in managing your business?
Well, I think one of the things, and I've learned this over the years that I've owned the Gracious Gourmet and spoken to other food producers, that it's important not only to be able to cook a great product or develop a great product with great with great graphics, with great appeal and everything, but it's important to make sure you're going to be making money. And it's important to understand business and understand what you need to do so you're not making something for $1 and selling it for 80 cents. You need to understand the economics behind the product and all the glamorous things that people see up front. And the background I had, I think, was very helpful. I also, as I mentioned earlier, worked with my husband and helped him build a retail business in Manhattan, Gracious Home, which sold many, over 150,000 products for the home. And that experience as well helped me understand where the retailer was sitting. So when I went into a retail store, having worked with hundreds of vendors in my experience with our business, helped me understand, sitting on the other side of the fence, who I was speaking with.
And I think you've said something really important. I think what you tend to see is a lot of passion for the product and for making this product and so on. But the other piece of it is you have to make money, because at some point down the line, when you need larger levels of capital, that's going to be the core question. You developed your products in your kitchen, but where do you produce them, Nancy? Do you self-manufacture or do you use a co-packer?
I use a co-packer because I started this business when I was in my mid-50s. And I decided at that stage in my life, first of all, I think there's a number of reasons I use a co-packer. First of all, when you have no customers, it, I think, is economic suicide to invest in a manufacturing facility when you have zero capacity used up, or less than 5% capacity, because there's a tremendous amount of variable costs you have to keep going in order to maintain a viable facility. And for me, it was much easier to have a co-packer, let the co-packer have the headaches of all the government regulations, have the headaches of, owning a manufacturing facility, and all of that entails. And I decided, let me do the things that I enjoy best, which are developing the products, getting out with retailers, which I tremendously enjoy, and marketing and selling the products. So that's what I did.
Well, Nancy, you have a tremendous innate sense of how to go about business, because that is exactly why one should use a co-packer. We've been talking with Nancy Wexelbaum. She's the owner of Gracious Gourmet. So, Nancy, tell our listeners a little bit more about how you first got consumers or the buyers interested in your product? I love the story about going around to your local retailers, but how did that translate into getting the consumer interested in your product?
Well, you know, with my products, there has to be a partnership with the retailer and the vendor, because vendors are lifeblood for a retailer, and there has to be a commitment from both sides. So, for instance, when I approach a retailer, I will do what I can to help launch the product. You know, with a food product, it's important to let customers taste it. Up to the retailers to do. I'll offer demo jars to them. I will offer, when I first started the business, I did a lot of demos. I hire people now to help with demos. The more I can do to help any retailer get the product in people's mouths so they say this is really delicious is, I think, very important. I think also having labels that are very informative helps the consumer. And I'll give you an example. On our labels, I put suggested uses because a lot of consumers are not familiar with sophisticated condiments, sophisticated flavor profiles, and they said, oh, this looks really interesting with a pretty jar, but then they said, well, what do I do with this? And on each of our labels, we have lots of ways people can use the product. And once they taste it, they can taste the quality of what we offer. I am a firm believer that any of the products under the Gracious Gourmet name, we use top quality ingredients. We make things in small batches, so products come out with a certain integrity in the product, and we don't, and we make sure we don't use any preservatives in products, and we make sure that the products at the end of the day taste good, because somebody will look at a product and say, oh my gosh, what a beautiful jar. This looks really appealing. And they get it home and they open it and it tastes terrible. They're not going to buy it again. But if it looks good and they open it up and it tastes good, they will buy it again. And this is the kind of partnership I try to engage the retailers. You know, many times it works, many times it doesn't work. You know, you have to always keep trying and not give up, be persistent.
No, absolutely. Nancy, you also sell to food service in larger containers. How much of your sales are at retail versus food service?
I would suggest probably about 20% of our sales are food service. I got into the food service business in sort of as the Gracious Gourmet requests from retailers evolved. A lot of the customers we have prepared food sections in their stores, or they have little adjunct cafes to their stores. And so I feel it's important if a customer says to me, gee, this is delicious, but I want to use it on a sandwich now. Do you have it in larger sizes? You know, I listen, what does the customer want? And then I bring it in, and then they buy it, and then it moves in that direction. So in food service, I started getting requests for larger sizes. Talked to the co-packer. I said, can you help me with this? They did, and that's how the food service started. And then I also I exhibited at several the National Restaurant Show, and in addition to the Specialty Food Association fancy food shows, and that push also helped to get more people aware that we sell our products in what's called bulk.
Do you find it any easier to work with a food service buyer versus a retail buyer?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. the nice thing about food service is that if a food service customer is using the product in something that really becomes a popular item for their customers, they basically buy the product, use it up, and keep ordering more. You know, there's a lot more effort into selling retail jars, but if you have a retailer who really knows how to market our products, any products they sell, and they are committed to making sure any products they bring into their stores are going to have a fair chance to do well, assuming it's a good quality product, I think that responsibility to promote the product will make that successful from the retail level as well.
Okay, that's great. And we didn't talk about this earlier, but I'm curious to know which retail outlets are your targets for selling your products. I think with your being such a premium product, you don't necessarily just want it anywhere. I suspect you've been pretty targeted, but I would love to hear you talk about that.
Well, as I said, the line has really evolved. When I first started the company, you know, I felt, having had retail experience, that it's important to know your customers. And I knew that this is not an inexpensive product because of a number of reasons, the quality of the ingredients, and making it in a very small batches, that the kind of retail outlets I wanted were ones where the product would not get lost on a shelf competing with Heinz ketchup, if I can use that as an analogy. And the small independent gourmet retailers were the ones who really could showcase the Gracious Gourmet because they brought in other products of the same quality, the same ilk, be it a cracker, be it another condiment, be it, cheese or, pickles or vinegars or oils or whatever, but they would bring in similar kinds of products. And so it's like having, if you have a Cadillac showroom and every car is a different kind of Cadillac, it's easier to sell because you have light quality. So that was my initial thrust. I did not go after the big commercial supermarket chains. Now, the retail business, since I started, has evolved considerably. I never believed that that it was possible to sell food online because people needed to taste it to buy it. But I have found that a lot of online retailers do well with our products. Subscription boxes do well with our products. I also found that some of the larger supermarket chains, as we've evolved, who really are going higher, more sophisticated products, in, for instance, the cheese and specialty area. And I feel the cheese and charcuterie areas have evolved and become much more specialty. And if our products are showcased in those kinds of departments, they do very well in a larger supermarket, but not certainly one that would be a very commercial, like the old A&P supermarkets. I don't think our products do well there, and I don't think the clientele in those kind of supermarkets really are looking for a product like the Gracious Gourmet. But I should add also, I think consumer tastes have really evolved and become much more sophisticated too. Consumers are more health conscious about food. They're more particular with what's in food products now. And so we're very careful to make sure that people are aware that our products, are very high quality that way.
Well, Nancy, we've been talking with Nancy Wexelbaum. She's the owner of the Gracious Gourmet. Nancy, you addressed so many of my questions. I'm almost have run out of questions, and I'm so glad you brought up about online sales. I'm sure it's probably been growing, but what proportion of your business are you finding is now selling online versus in your gourmet or your specialty grocery stores or your gift basket retailers?
I think online is a growing area. A lot of our retailers have online presence and sell both online and in their brick and mortar stores. I have found in speaking to a lot of our independent retailers over the years, especially in the last couple of years, that they're saying that more and more people are shopping online. Amazon, for instance, is taking a lot of business away from a lot of these bricks and mortar stores because it's very easy. Today it was pouring rain where I am, and it's easier to go online, click on something that I want, have it delivered the next day, than it is to, brave the traffic and the weather and go out for a couple of hours to a retail store if there's something that I want. And that thought process and pattern, I think, is hurting the independent retailers if they don't make their online presence as strong as their retail store presence.
Yes, and I think that's an excellent point. I wanted to shift gears a little bit, Nancy, and talk a little bit about how have you funded the business?
Good question. I have basically funded it with my own money. I have not looked for outside sources. I have not looked for outside investors. My husband and I always never wanted to rely on banks or rely on, other partners. And so I decided when I started this business, I was fortunate enough to be able to fund it myself.
Oh, that's really excellent. And how many folks are involved in the business with you?
Well, I have a lady in my office. Her name is Kristen Colby, and I'm shouting out to her by name because she has been enormously helpful to me. My husband was quite ill over the summer, and I had to operate not from the office every day, and she held down the fort and really helped. If it wasn't for her, I would have had to close the business. So I just wanted to, if you don't mind, give a real recognition to her. I have other people who I work with as independent contractors, a wonderful person who's a journalist on the West Coast who now does a lot of freelance work for me, including all my social media. Her name is Natalie Noblet. She's a stay-at-home mother who does freelance work, and she's been fabulous. I have a number of people in the computer area, in some bookkeeping needs, in the co-packer, as an example, is somebody, I don't have my own plant. I use a co-packer. All of these different expertises, areas of expertise have been tremendous, and I contract with them for help when I need them. I have a wonderful graphics person. I have a wonderful person who does my labels, and certainly a wonderful group of retailers who have been very supportive of what I've done as well to help keep the business going.
So Nancy, do you have a favorite recipe using one of your products?
Well, Anne, that's like asking if I have a favorite child.
I know. For sure.
Yeah, sometimes I get it when I develop new products. I mean, I love all my products equally because I would not have put time, effort, and money into developing them, producing them, and selling them. Some sell better than others. You know, right now, I came out with 3 products this summer. One was a farmhouse tomato jam. I'm particularly fond of that one at the moment. And also a roasted red pepper artichoke tapenade. But I can tell you, I'll go, sometimes I'll take a jar of the artichoke parmesan tapenade and just open it up and eat it out of the jar and eat the whole jar of it. So I get
Oh, good for you.
It's sort of one of the dangers of being in the food business.
Yes, absolutely. So, Nancy, what's in store for the future of the Gracious Gourmet?
Well, a number of things. There's one area that we haven't touched on, and I believe it's one of great opportunity. It has been a great opportunity for the Gracious Gourmet, and that is private label and co-branding. Mm-hmm. And we have had a lot of requests because I find many retailers are trying to build their own name. And where we can, we've worked with a variety of retailers, private labeling. I have worked with wineries who have said, we have, these wonderful wines and we want to incorporate them in a product. Can you modify one of your products and help us with that? Mm-hmm. I've been able to do that. I work now actually with Target, and they had a request for products at a different price point than what we have the branded line. And I came out with a co-branded program with them a couple of years ago for some specific products which I value engineered for their market, and that's done very well. Our name is on it as well as Target's. So these kind of opportunities have also presented themselves. When I started the business, as I mentioned, we've had I started with 6 products in retail jars selling to, independent gourmet retailers. But I think to keep a business alive and growing and flourishing, one has to be aware and sensitive to what the market wants and adapt accordingly. And I've tried to do that.
It seems, as I've been talking with you, you've done that in so many different ways, whether it's been recognizing the growth of online, certainly the growth of private label, co-branding, which, as you say, is your brand as well as someone else's brand being on the product, and obviously being very careful that you're not just giving them the Gracious Gourmet in their label, that you somehow have to change the product so that it meets what they want and it also doesn't directly compete with your own. I think I may have time for one more question, Nancy, and that would be, what advice would you give to a budding entrepreneur about the joys and pitfalls of running your own business?
Well, I think the most important piece of advice, I don't like to give advice, but the most important thing I can suggest is that if you're starting your own business, you have to be committed to it, to work 25/8 and not 24/7, but invent more time in the week, be committed. And when there's bumps in the road, and every business has bumps in the road, when you have bumps, don't throw in the towel. Just ride through the bumps, figure out a way to get a solution, talk to other people, ask advice. Don't be afraid to say, I need help, and work through it. And don't give up. Be very perseverant.
We've been talking with Nancy Wetzelbaum. She's the owner of Gracious Gourmet. It's been a fascinating time listening to her. Nancy, your website again?
thegraciousgourmet.com. You have to use The Gracious Gourmet, 3 words, .com.
Well, a link to that website will be on Food and Wine Insider tonight, where you can hear this and every other past and future program, and you can tell us if there's a guest you'd like to hear.
You've been listening to Food and Wine Insider with Ann Daw and Don Mazzella. Want to join us on a future show? Contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Until next time, have a passion for food, wine, and profits, and think of our program, Food and Wine Insider.